So now I want to go over the component section with you. Now, as you can see, we have all of these visuals of a lot of the reusable elements that you use across your websites. So if I want to add a new component, what I can do is click on this plus icon and we get these common components. So feel free to add one of these. For this video, I'm going to be focusing on the button mainly. So as you can see here, we have the class for this component. And if I want to change that, I can just click on edit. And in the very top field, we can rename the main class here. So as I type, you can see that it all changes. Then underneath that, we have modifiers. So if I add this class to a div, then it's going to look like this. And then if I add another class of small, that's going to append to the element and it's going to be a small. I will show you this in a second. We also have states. So we have a hovered state. So when I hover over it, we have a transform here. So it's going to go up in the Y direction. You can see that happening here. And we also have a focus. So if I click on the button, you can see this outline appear. So let's go ahead and add a new state just for demonstration purposes. So just hover over your main class here and click on state. So for this example, I'm just going to add before. And with a before pseudo, we need to do content and make it empty. And let's just give this a width. I'm going to use space XS, and I'll also do the same for height. And just so we can see it, let's change the background color. So as you can see, here is the before. Now we've had a lot of customers asking how they could potentially modify this before pseudo, for example, on hover, because they think this is quite limited, but actually we can achieve that. So let me show you how. So if I want this red dot only to appear when I hover over this button, so what I'll do in the original pseudo is set the opacity, for example, to 0. And now what I can do is I can add a new modifier. So click on this button here. And then what we can do is make the full rule here. So we'll do button. When I hover the button, we want to change the before. So we can write the statement like this. And now I'll do opacity 1. So when I hover over, you can see that that's happening right there. So I've just added a transition to the main before pseudo here, just so it's a little bit more subtle. As you can see, that works just fine. So let me remove this, and I'll remove this one as well. And let me show you this class being added to some elements in Bricks Builder. So I'll save the changes here. And here I have a blank page in Bricks. So let's just add a section here and let's add a div. This will be our button. And inside the button, I'm just going to add basic text as well. I'm also going to add a button element. So if I search button here, you'll notice that we get the Bricks default. So I'm going to rename this one to my button, and let's call this one Bricks button. So all I'm going to do is add our main class of btn button to this div. And you can see we get the styling pulling through from here. And if you remember, we had some modifiers. So we have small. So let's go ahead and add small to this element. And you'll notice that it gets a little bit smaller. If I want it to be a ghost style button, I can add ghost as a modifier. So now when I hover, you can see we get this. Now the text is not changing because I need to change that within my components. So I'll just add a color here on the hover state. I'll change it to black. So now this should reflect in the builder if I save and refresh. So now you can see it's going black. But this all depends on what kind of theme you're using. You can of course use variables instead of hard coding the colors like I just did. So let me remove the ghost, and let's say, for example, you do want to use a Bricks button, which is quite convenient. We could add the class of button to this button, or what might be even better is if we inspect this on the front end. So let's inspect why it's always yellow. I'm just going to remove my button class here, reinspect. So you can see we have a class coming from Bricks. Now, the class that they typically use for buttons is brxe-button. So what we can do is copy this class. Let's go back to Core Framework, and what we can do here is do a comma and target the bricks button class as well. I'll save this, and now on the front, when I refresh, you can see that every button that I add from now on is going to be inherited from this component here. So just to show you that, let's add a button, and now it is in the style of Core Framework. So just one more quick example. Let's say I want to add a modifier, and the modifier is going to be a button kind of with a down arrow. All right, so let's go ahead and add a new modifier. I'm going to call this modifier bottom arrow. Okay, now I will be using a pseudo element inside, so I will add a state, and that state is going to be set to position absolute, which means this one here, the parent, needs to be position relative. So let's just add that in there. And now for this one, well, let's use an after pseudo. Okay, so in here we'll do our styling for the arrow at the bottom. So once again, we need an empty content. We need a width and height. So width, I'm going to use space extra small. So because I'm using a variable here, this means it's going to be responsive. Height is going to be the same. Just so that we can see it, let's add a background color of red, and there it is. We need to position this absolute. Okay, let's put it to the bottom. So just for now, I'll do 0, and we need to rotate it. So I'm going to rotate 45 degrees. Okay, so now let's position this a little bit better. So for the bottom, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a calc function. It needs to be 0 pixels at the bottom minus half of itself, right? So we need to do minus. Now we know the width and height is variable space xs. So minus the full height of itself, which is space xs. All right, so you can see now it's come to the bottom, but we need to do it only by half of itself. This is fully of itself at the moment, so divided by 2. And just to make sure that it is center on the horizontal axis, we can do left. Now if I do 0, it's going to go right to the left. So once again, we'll do calc. Now let's do, first of all, 50%, which should be the middle, but this is going to be from the left edge, so we want it to be fully properly centered. So we'll do minus the width of itself, which is once again var space xs, and then once again we divide by 2, so that just ensures that it is going to be completely centered. And the last thing for us to do is just change this to our primary color. And now we have a button with a modifier with bottom arrow. So if I save this, let's go back to bricks and let's just refresh this page. I'm just going to add some space here. Let's say I want this button here to have an arrow. So I can add my new modifier, which is bottom arrow. You can see that it's been pulled through here, and now you can see I have an arrow on this element in the form of a modifier. So pretty cool. Once again, it is quite powerful what we can do in the components area here. And this is only the button component. We do have many components, as you can see. So we have card or avatar. Let's just add an image to a new page. So I'm going to do image, select container, add image. In here, I'm just going to select a dummy image here, insert, and very simple, we just add the class avatar. And as you can see, this is pulling in once again from our components. So currently it is using the space of 2 extra large, so this is going to be responsive. On mobile, you can see it gets much smaller. Now if I want a smaller avatar, once again we have a modifier that we can use to make it super small. Okay, or we have large to make it bigger. And this is very flexible because once again you can change these values to suit your preferences.